Welcome everyone to Applying to Graduate School Biomedical Programs, a panel conversation that is part of the 2021 Leadership Alliance Virtual Professional Development Series. We are happy you have joined us and look forward to answering your questions and giving you information about applying to graduate programs. My name is Gina Alfonso, and I am a current fifth year at Vanderbilt University in the Chemical and Physical Biology program, and I will be the moderator for today's events. It is my pleasure to share this time with today's panelists. I will let them introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Beth Bowman.
Hi, my name is Dr. Elizabeth Bowman, or Beth Bowman. You can call me Beth. I am an assistant professor at Vanderbilt University. My major role here has been the assistant director of our biomedical graduate programs, the interdisciplinary graduate program, and quantitative and chemical biology program. And in this role, I largely facilitate admissions and recruitment. I also run our summer research program, the Vanderbilt Summer Science Academy. So it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Bowman. Dr. Marcus Lambert, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Marcus Lambert. I currently serve as Associate Vice President for Research Strategy and Operations at SUNY Downstate, which is in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm a faculty member in our School of Public Health here. In my previous roles, I was an assistant dean for diversity and student life, and I've done plenty of recruiting and thinking about graduate education in the biomedical sciences. My own degree is in biomedical science. So happy to talk about application process to graduate school.
Thank you, Dr. Lambert. I'd like to invite Dr. Noah Tanisei to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I am Associate Dean for Biomedical Sciences at NYU Grossman School of Medicine. I'm the director of the Vilcek Institute for Graduate Biomedical Sciences program. I'm also a professor of microbiology. I've been overseeing a PhD program, the MD PhD program, and some undergraduate research program for the past 8 years. Yes, but I've been on the faculty here for decades. So I've been training students, and now I do a lot of advising and provide a lot of oversight to the programs, all the programs that we run. Thank you.
A huge thank you to all of our panelists for being here today. The Leadership Alliance appreciates your time and your wisdom, and I look forward to jumping into the student questions. So let's get started. The first question I have is master's or PhD? And let's start with Dr. Bowman.
That is, wow, what a question to start with, Gina. You know, I think this is an underappreciated question, whether someone should get a master's or a PhD. And I think so much of that has to do, so much of the right reasons for getting a PhD are about what the degree is for. So a master's degree can give you some strong technical skills in biomedical training. If you want to be at the forefront leading a research program, and you want to have the training really in those deep critical thinking skills, and if you want to have the flexibility, the job flexibility to be a leader in that world, especially in an academic setting, then a PhD is the right call. I think the challenge is that, you know, a master's program can give you some of that for sure, especially if you're working in an industry setting. But if your goal is, if you have a passion for learning how to think critically, a PhD is a better fit.
Oh, I apologize, I was muted. Thank you, Dr. Bowman. Dr. Lambert, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate Beth's answer, Dr. Bowman's answer. I think, you know, practically everyone should be thinking about a PhD. It's just going to open so many more doors for you. And if you're interested in truly a research career, let's go for it. Go for the PhD. Now, you know, some of you may not be sort of at the stage where you feel confident about what PhD degree program you want to pursue, or if you would be competitive. And that's where I think a master's degree can help. But, you might also want to consider working for a few years, maybe as a research tech or doing, a post-bac. There are other options in addition to just the master's program. But I certainly would set my goal and my sights on a PhD if you're interested in a research career.
Thank you, Dr. Lambert. Would you like to add anything, Dr. Tanisei?
I just want to add that, there are also financial concerns. If you were to go for a master's, typically you're going to have to pay the tuition. And so I know some students feel like they're not as prepared, should I go for master's? But then I say, you're going to have to, pay a lot of money to get that 1 year experience. So I would say go for a PhD, or like Dr. Lambert said, try to find an opportunity to work in a lab and gain more experience instead of enrolling in the formal program. Unless you really want to just get a set of skills, for 1 year, get the master's degree and have a specific job that you want to apply to, then that would make sense. But for those of you who are really thinking of PhD, I don't think you necessarily need to go through that route.
Thank you. Okay, on to the next question. Whether you're applying for a master's or a PhD, who should these letters of recommendation come from? Let's start with Dr. Lambert.
Certainly letters of recommendation are always valuable when they come from your research mentors. So those who know you in a research capacity, but also those who might know you in other capacities as well. Sometimes it's valuable to have, let's say you were in a program like a MARC program or RISE program or some of these other programs that might know, aspects about, your resilience and integrity and that so forth. It's great to have, people who can speak to that. But, if you are, let's say, you're going into applying to a PhD program, I think most of those on the admissions committee, they want to know, well, how are you in the lab? Do you have an interest and a desire to, pursue a career? Like in some sense, they're trying to get a picture of you and your research capabilities. So having letters from research advisors, I think is probably one of the first steps. And then I'll let some of the other panelists fill in.
Okay, Dr. Bowman.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I think faculty who know your research are important. And I think sometimes one of the challenging things might be that perhaps in a research lab, you're working more closely with a graduate student or a postdoc than you are a faculty member on the day-to-day level. But the graduate student and postdoc should not be the ones signing and submitting your letter. Perhaps they'll contribute to the letter, but the people reviewing your application are faculty members and they want to hear a faculty member's perspective. Almost certainly they'll talk to the grad student and postdoc in writing the letter. But that can be a common misconception that we see to have. If a graduate student submits the letter, that just seems a little bit naive. I think if you have a couple of research mentors submitting a letter, then having someone that might be able to speak to your academic abilities would be strong as well. That should definitely take a back seat to the research letters. Another quick misconception I'll mention is that, there's a big distinction between applying to a PhD program versus like a medical school program. Letters that speak to, your leadership or involvement in activities outside of STEM might not carry that much weight in PhD admissions, whereas maybe it does in MD admissions, but I've seen sometimes misadvising that suggests that having a sports coach or religious leader write a letter, those are really not helpful at all. So your letter should come from STEM research faculty, followed by potentially academic advisors.
Thank you. Dr. Tanisei, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I agree with what the other panelists said. It's really important that the letters come from professors because they just have a different perspective. right? So graduate student may say, this was the best undergraduate, I have worked with. Well, they haven't really done that much, supervising. So you're going to have to, you need, faculty's perspective. And if, like a postdoc can sometimes co-sign letter with the faculty, I mean, that's okay, but you definitely have to ask a letter from the professor. And also, when you're approaching faculty to write a letter, I think it's good to really have, sit down and talk about, what you intend to do, what schools you're applying to, what your interests are, of course, give them a copy of your CV, so they know, where to start. You don't want to just email says, please write a letter, because it's really hard to write something, specific, tailored to the applicant's needs, if there's not much information there. And the reason that's also important is because students who are applying to MD PhD programs, they sometimes they don't necessarily clarify that you're applying to a dual degree program and your real interests are in doing research. And so some faculty will just say, I strongly recommend this applicant to medical school. And that it kind of sends a mixed message. And when we read these letters, we're not sure if your mentor didn't really know that your student is applying to a dual degree program and thought applying to medical school, then there's sort of mixed message that is difficult to interpret when we're reviewing the applications. So I think it's important to clarify what program you're applying to and what your intentions are. So I think the communication is important, and also it's rare, but occasionally there are instances where you've worked in a lab for quite some time. It was not a good experience, and you don't really necessarily want to ask that PI for a letter because you didn't have a good experience. But then I think it's good to sort of have an explanation. Sometimes absence of letter, makes us wonder what happened, and so that's also something to keep in mind, that and it's okay because it does happen. There's a fallout, and it's not your fault, but when you don't see anything and then you see letters from everybody else, then you kind of start to wonder what happened, and then will it end up contacting the faculty? So that's just something to keep in mind. Thanks.
Very important. I had a similar experience, actually. So piggybacking off of that question, and I was in a similar boat, having a math degree going into a biomedical PhD program. When you're applying to PhD programs, specifically in biomed, how would you express different research interests if they were outside of what you did in undergrad? And someone mentioned that they had a computer science degree that they're working towards now, looking to apply to a biomedical PhD program. Let's start with Dr. Bowman.
That's a great question. I think I'll first mention that there are some programs that are tailored towards that sort of transition. So I want to make the distinction. Some programs might expect you to have a lot of biology. And so if you haven't had that with your degree, you might not be competitive at all, versus others might be exactly what you're looking for. So if you're looking for a quantitative biology program, just make sure that you have those conversations to make sure that you have the background. Now, with that said, I think experience is pretty important. So I think sometimes it can be a little bit, we can be a little bit unsure if you're coming from a very different background from what you want to do. If you don't have any experience, academic or research in that setting, that might look like you're, that might not give us the evidence. We're scientists, we're looking at your application package as data. That might not give us the evidence for us to be able to say that what that future looks like. So even if it's a taste and a summer experience doing that sort of research, I think that should be pretty strong. But I think that it just really depends on the type of program you're looking for. So make sure that you know what the expectations are for those programs. Yeah.
Thank you. But Dr. Lambert, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I don't think I have anything meaningful to add right now. I'll pass the mic.
Okay, Dr. Tanisei, do you have anything to add?
So I think the question about computer science background, I think that's great. I mean, because all fields in biology now could really use those skills, right? And if you have that background, you can really take advantage of it. And so I guess my recommendation is that you can certainly talk about your experience and indicate what areas you want to go into or you want to pursue in graduate school. But as Liz said, even having a little bit of experience definitely helps, because it's hard to kind of theoretically say, I kind of want to interest in immunology, but I really have no experience. And that's just sort of a hard sell. But if you're going to say, I'm interested in immunology, I don't have much experience, but you should definitely read enough about it to be able to talk about it. I mean, that's definitely much more convincing, right? Because when we assign interviewers, we definitely look at applicants' past experience to see if we can match right interviewers to speak with the applicant. But if the applicant expresses interest in in immunologists but not much experience, I mean, I think the applicant probably want to talk to immunologists, but the interviews may not go so well if they really don't know anything, and so that that could lead to sort of misunderstanding and the result that it's not what you want. So just be prepared to talk a little bit about areas of interest if it's different from what you've worked on.
Okay.
Gina, I just do have a minor point to add, and I think just sort of piggybacking off of what Naoko mentioned about, sometimes, maybe it's not even computer science, but sometimes you come in with almost a totally different background. I think a little bit, sometimes it's field specific, and, maybe you have like a bioengineering background and you're interested in, some labs that could incorporate that bioengineering, which makes you interested in applying to certain programs. But if you want to switch to something that's almost totally different and has, sort of little overlap, you got to have sort of justification for that, and, really be able to have, meaningful conversations if you get to the interview stage. And I think even thinking about the types of programs that you apply to can be important too, because some programs are a bit more umbrella, and you're in, you're all taking pretty much the same core coursework initially. And some programs are very specific, where you're not applying to this umbrella program, but a very specific, department of microbiology. And you have this sort of engineering background, and you might not be as appealing or as competitive if you, just aren't thoughtful about how you sort of, position yourself. So it's a little bit nuanced, to the answer, but long story short is, don't count yourself out because you haven't, especially coming from a computer science background, that's I think going to be applicable to a lot of labs. But you do want to be smart and strategic about who you apply to and how you think you can be an addition to the program.
Thank you. Okay, so still going into the application process, what advice would you give for students figuring out what to put in their statement of purpose? Let's start with Dr. Tanisei.
Well, we always say our statement of purpose is pretty short. We've had only 500 words, probably one of the shortest. We may actually expand on that a little bit, because in our application, and I think this is school specific, so you kind of have to decide how much weight to put in on these different sections. But we do have separate research, description research section, and then there's a personal statement section. And so we don't necessarily want applicants to sort of repeat all the things that they've stated in the research section, but use the space to really just focus on the main experience that really drove you, to science, like what really got you excited, and why you wanted to go to graduate school. What are your long-term goals? And you don't necessarily have to be super specific, but what you want to do. But what I want to see, what we want to see come across is your passion, your dedication, your commitment to research. I mean, that's it, right? So the application is really like the first step in terms of encountering our applicants. And so the next step will be interviews, and then maybe you can do more in interviews, but your personal statement needs to be sort of convincing and appealing, and just want to say like, I want to meet this candidate. Like if it has that appeal, then we'll say, okay, let's interview this student. But yeah, we are investing in the student, and the students investing their life into this program. So we need to have sort of mutual interest, and if you didn't get selected, well, I'd say it's not a good match. That we're looking for is not the same as what you're looking for. So I just want to just be yourself and explain who you are in the personal statement, so that who you are comes across.
Thank you. Dr. Lambert, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so I think it's more common. I'm starting to see it more at many institutions that you'll have, a statement of purpose or this sort of personal statement and a statement of research and kind of your research experience. But at some institutions, it's all sort of one statement. So, pay close attention to the question prompts about how to answer that. And of course, the word limit or the character limit. But I think largely the approach is, similar depending, on what type of institution you apply to. And I'll speak to both types. So if it's, one long statement, I tend to encourage students to really talk more about their research experience. But I think in either case, you're telling your story, and sometimes that's hard to articulate, but you have to think about what experiences have you had that really help you stand out and make you unique. And I think when you think about it, the labs that you join, the type of research that you join, that you do, how that sort of motivated you to pursue the next research opportunity, all of that is unique. You rarely ever find it to be the exact same. So, but figuring out how to articulate that is the challenge. And usually I think, especially in those statements that sort of ask for one piece, you want to say a little bit about, who you are and why you're motivated to pursue a research program, but then get into the research experience, because that, I think, is the piece that we want to see as reviewers for why you're applying to this program. What experiences have you had in the research lab? What have you studied? What have you learned? What have you found that ultimately has contributed to your decision and your motivation to apply to the program? And then by the end, maybe you're identifying some labs that you would want to work with. Now, more specifically with a statement of purpose or, these sort of personal statements that ask a little bit about, you as a person, take that opportunity to articulate, some of your values and who you are. And again, sometimes these things help when you bounce off of other people and have other people read it just to see how it's perceived. And it might take a few drafts or a few iterations, but practice on that. And I certainly encourage you to talk about those things that might help you stand out a bit from the crowd.
Thank you. Dr. Rimmons, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add is I think sometimes people feel like they need to, Marcus just mentioned standing out from the crowd. I think even just being passionate about your research is good. I worry about somebody feeling like they have to have a really wow statement up front and then that being disingenuous. I don't think you need to have some majorly impactful, earth-shattering first sentence to really grab attention in order to get an interview. I think what you need to do is just be reflective about why you're interested in doing this. And, if you have some family history or personal history that might truly meaningfully contribute to that, then I think that's okay to mention. But I also don't think you need to come up with that sort of story if it's not actually a genuine thing. If you do research and you enjoy research, great. And that's why you want to do a PhD, great. I think I sometimes see, I don't know, over the top statements that feel like it's contrived instead of what I'd really like to hear is why you like doing science. So, and I agree with Marcus mentioned this as a story. I think another thing to kind of avoid is to just list, I did A, I did B, I did C. I think what makes your story personal and unique is thinking about what you got from those, just like Marcus mentioned, and that's going to make you stand out, just like he said. So that opening wow statement, I wouldn't, I know it's always hard to start with a blank piece of paper. It is, but don't think that that's what's going to get you admission. It's going to be more how you reflect on your science that's going to get you admission or an interview.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I think back sometimes when students are applying to undergrad, you have these very poetic, statements, and you take quotes from different, philosophers and so forth. We don't need that at this stage. Let's get to, your science, and we want you a part of this community. So we want to understand how you think, and your experiences are a part of that.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so Beth talked about the interviews. So I'm going to go into the next question on, you're at the interview stage now. So what are the programs typically looking for in interviews? What makes you stand out in your interview? Let's start with Dr. Tanisei.
Well, I think the majority of our faculty interviewers ask students, applicants about their research, and that's pretty much the fallback. Although I do hear sometimes from the applicants that they did not have chance to talk about their research, but they heard a lot about their research, no, their interviewers' research, which I'm sort of frustrated with. So, but that's unfortunately sometimes that does happen. So just to let you know, it's not that they're not interested in you. Like faculty interviewers are interested in talking about their research, but hopefully you will have interviewers who want to learn about your work. This is it's a tricky question because I've sort of struggled with this, and some of that is on us, to educate or train our faculty interviewers to ask the right questions. And there are occasionally, they will start asking questions, look at the application, and they pick on anything that that interests them, and that may not be the best or the most interesting research experience that you might have had, and that's frustrating because the student does not have a chance to talk about what excited them the most. I mean, I usually, when I interview, I say, well, tell me about the most recent experience of what you're doing now, or what what was most exciting to you, and give them the floor so that they can talk about their work. But not everybody is like that. So, like, first of all, like anything you put down the application is fair game, because some people will ask questions that about research that you did years ago. So it's good to be prepared, to have some knowledge, and if it's work that you did way back, I think it's worth the effort to sort of follow up on like what's happened, the latest on the work that you left off as an undergraduate, or from research years ago. And so that, definitely, it shows that you're curious, you're interested in, the project that you were engaged in before. And also, when you're talking about research, it is important that you understand the big picture. So there are, clearly, all the details of experiments and in reagents and assays that you've run, but it's the big picture that we are interested in. Like, does the applicant understand like the question that the lab is asking, like what's the history of the project? I mean, history is also important, because I'm sometimes disappointed when I ask question about how was that found, or how did that assay get developed, and I say, well, that was before my time, and that is not a good answer, because that indicates that you're not really curious about the project that you inherited. And it's okay to inherit a project, but you want to know everything about the project, that the project history, right? So you want to know a lot about the work that was done before, and the big picture, and where it's going in the future. Why is that important? And what's your contribution? So I'll stop there with the research question.
Thank you. Dr. Lambert, would you like to add anything?
Sure. I mean, I don't know if I have much to add. I think, when Naoka mentioned about just educating the faculty, it reminded me, the trick was when I was interviewing, to get the faculty to talk as much about their own research as possible. That way you had, less time in the hot seat. And then you could, but I think that in some sense is almost the start to an engaging sort of scientific discussion, which you kind of want your interview to be. Like, even at the point that they do start talking about their own research, or even you start talking about yours, like, you want it to be like, you get excited about, something that they're working on, and they get excited about what you did, and you get to talking about, certain things, and you can say, oh, well, that didn't work out, but then we tried this, and you like show your enthusiasm. And I know, some of these things can be very nervous, but practice beforehand. and go through, just talking about your work and thinking about, in some sense, all aspects, not the sort of abstract answer of things, but just, what you intended to get out of the project and what your role was, and, what you found and what you would pursue if you had more time. And the more I think it can be a bit of a natural conversation about the research and your experience, I think the better.
Thank you. Dr. Bowman, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just a couple of quick points. This is all wonderful. I think, yeah, research is the focus, obviously. I think I'll mention a few pitfalls that I've seen. The first is if someone is being asked questions about the research that they've done, and this interviewee isn't able to describe the methodology that they're doing. I mean, it's good to describe the whys and the hows, but I've seen sometimes people who like use a reagent or a kit and they don't know what's actually going on there. I think this kind of gets to the curiosity. You should know what the reagents are for, especially if it's a major part of what you're doing. Another pitfall that I've seen is a lack of engagement. And what I mean by that is, boy, interviews are challenging for shy people, because what we're looking for is a scientific conversation, is a dialogue, just like what Dr. Lambert said. And that can be difficult for shy people, but I also want to emphasize that we, as people who are assessing you, we interpret quietness. It could be interpreted as one of two things. It could be that, yes, you're shy, but you know what's going on, or it could be that you're having a hard time following. So what I want to encourage to kind of combat that is, if a faculty member is talking about their science, yeah, you can sit back and listen to a lot of that and show your enthusiasm with nodding and all of that. But it's better if you interrupt them with, meaningful questions. If you have a thought, if what they said connected to a class that you took, or if it connected to your research, or if you want to have a follow-up of what they did next, engage in that. And hopefully that's fun for you. Honestly, if that's difficult for you and you're not interested, I think that says something. So this should be, I know interviews are nerve-wracking. They are, but they also should be fun. You get to talk science with scientists. And, I want you to get to that point in your interview. The last thing that's kind of a pitfall is I've heard students ask questions, kind of broad questions like, oh, what does this program have to offer me? That can come across like you don't know the school you're interviewing at, or you don't know enough about what's going on there. So I think making your questions a little bit about the program, or about, a faculty member's research, making them a little bit specific, or even relate to, I've heard that this is a very collaborative institution. Do you collaborate with others? That's a good broad question, but it's specific to that person. And then they're illustrating a broader concept. So just a few final points there.
Thank you. A quick side question with that. Given a pandemic, in your opinion, how do you think that the pandemic has changed this application process, especially for rising seniors? They're going to be applying now, and I know things are still virtual, hybrid. So, Dr. Lambert.
Yeah, it's been quite a number of changes, and I know it's. I mean, one of the biggest challenges, I think, has been the ability to gain research experience during the pandemic. Ordinarily, you might be working, doing a summer research program, or, working in the lab, and, the pandemic, I know, disrupted that for a lot of people. How do you now sort of, grapple with that, both in terms of timing and like, should I apply now? Maybe you're at the stage where you're graduating college, and ordinarily you would be applying to, PhD programs, or maybe you or have know that you want to apply, but you question, do you have enough research experience? So all of those things, I think, can be challenging. And I think on the institutional side, we've been trying to figure out how we I think I would say that some institutions have a general sort of answer to how to deal with that, but other ways institutions have, been adapting during the pandemic has changed. Certainly with interviews, oftentimes we would have brought students on campus. Last year, my past institution did all virtual interviews, and we've also, changed part of our application to where we even accommodated, a statement on how COVID had, impacted, things for you, just to provide that opportunity to talk about it. So I think that's it's a challenge. And I'll turn it up before I turn it over to the panelists. I'll just comment on the piece of my personal perspective of how to deal with the challenge of research experience and whether you should apply at this point, or do you have enough experience, given the normal sort of timeline. Let's say you were a sophomore in college and the pandemic hit, so you kind of lost, for better or worse, a year of research, that would have been in the laboratory. Maybe you had a virtual experience. How do you now, talk about that or put that into your application, et cetera, et cetera. My sort of personal perspective is that I wouldn't think about applying so much on the normal time route, but just making sure that you feel like you have enough experience to be competitive in a PhD program. So for example, maybe you didn't get a chance to do that summer research program that you would have done. Maybe that impacted your level of confidence and the sort of experience that you would have ordinarily had in order to be competitive. I don't think that institutions are sort of lowering their standards in any way. I think they still want strong students, and it may take you a little bit longer to gain that experience to be strong, and that's okay. It's not a race. It's a long-term investment, and many times it ends up being the same amount of time period. Sometimes you jump into a program too early without having gathered enough experience and just enough focus on what you want to pursue. Sometimes that will prolong your degree process. And whereas if you had taken that time and worked maybe as a research tech or, done a post-bac or something else, you end up, having a shorter sort of PhD training period that ultimately amounted to about the same time. So, just be thoughtful, get feedback about, your readiness. And I wouldn't worry about trying to keep up on a timeline of what you might think is traditional. But I'll pass it up to the other panelists.
Thank you. Dr. Bowman, would you like to add anything?
I just fully want to agree that, honestly, in this last application cycle, we're looking at the pool of applicants we have. And so I think if honestly speaking, we would have had a huge dip in the amount of research experience kind of across the board. We probably would have had to slightly decrease our standard for who we would admit in terms of the amount of research experience we expected. To be honest, that didn't happen. We still had a huge number of people who had a lot of research experience. And to be straightforward, what that meant is the bias shifted a little bit towards people who had gap time and who were doing research full time. And that's unfortunate. And I just want to recognize the truth and honesty of that. And there's a huge part of me that sees that that's unfair, because people maybe who would have had research experience in the summers or during the school year, they're at a little bit, less of an advantage when applying. But on the other hand, I fully agree with Marcus. You don't want to jump into a PhD program unless you have had the experience to know that this is what you want. And not just that, but that you have the experience to make smart decisions in grad school. The research you get, in preparation for grad school is really important, but a huge component of what that does is it helps you make sure you know what you're looking for in terms of research fit, specific research topic fit, lab fit, PI fit, mentor fit, all of that. Those are the big decisions that really matter. And then the other side of it is I've seen people rush into, not just rush into a graduate program right after undergrad or something, but also find a program that will accept them. They'll take any PhD program offer, even if it's not really the standard that they could achieve with a gap year. And to me, that's doing a disservice to yourself. That's not investing in yourself. If you get into a lower ranked, only, moderately okay program, not that ranking really matters, but if you don't get into the program that's deserving of you and that you could get into after a year, maybe two of gap work, don't rush into those programs. Take the time, work as a research assistant for a year or two to be competitive for top ranked programs, because you're just going to get, generally speaking, more opportunity to find better labs and a better opportunity. Don't run. This isn't a race. So I'll just fully agree with everything he said.
Very true. You can't sprint a marathon. Dr. Tanisei, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, the last application cycle, we definitely did see some applicants who were academically strong, but have not had much experience because of the pandemic. And I thought it was a hard call, because they just seemed like they were ready to go, and they could not get this experience that they needed. But then we looked for other ways that the applicant decided to spend the time when they couldn't do in-person research. There were different ways to stay engaged or learn something new, or learn to code, or any sort of online activities that they were able to secure. And so, we had a conversation with our faculty, the admissions committee, and, there's some discrepancies between those who managed to get some experience despite the shutdown, and they were able to get through, whereas there are others who just did not have that opportunity, and just felt like wasn't necessarily fair. And some faculty say, this applicant really needs more experience. And to which I said, well, when are they going to get that experience? Because it was still, the pandemic was still not, still going on. And how many jobs are out there that they can really take advantage of? So I just wanted to say, these are kinds of discussions that we have to make the playing field, more fair between those who have access to resources and opportunities versus those who don't, and rely on summer opportunities, which we could not provide last summer. And we're doing this, we're doing a summer program remotely this summer because we had to provide some opportunity, even though as much as we wanted to do in person, just couldn't. But I just, I'm not sure how many more years they can sort of keep looking for these opportunities to strengthen their application. So, it's a balance. And I feel like when applicant made the case that they're ready, despite not having had enough that we would otherwise consider enough, we thought we would take a chance and give them the opportunity. And so it's a gamble, I think, for the institution and for the applicant, because we live in different times.
Gina, I feel like this is such an important topic. Do you mind if I say one more thing?
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
I'll give a few anecdotes because I used to run a summer program and we ran it virtually, and I had one student who after that summer was basically intent on applying to PhD programs. In my humble opinion, I thought that person should have probably took another year, but the person ended up being competitive, and my surprise for a lot of programs. But I think the number that person would have gotten accepted to probably could have been higher. But the person did get into a fantastic school. And there was another person who had this person finished college and applied straight to PhD programs. This person I thought was very competitive for a number of programs. And the only sort of difference in the pandemic year was that they had done a summer research program that was entirely virtual. And it was not didn't get the in-person, opportunity. If they had gotten that in-person opportunity, I thought that they would have been like really, really ready. But even with the virtual, they was able to sort of, really have a very meaningful summer experience and got a lot of recommendation from that and got into a number of top programs. So even if your experiences have been, virtual summer program experiences, I think, there's been a lot of variability on what that means, but I think, that can be meaningful. It really depends on how much engagement was there, how much you actually did. In some programs, there was a lot of engagement. Others were shortened and it was just mostly professional development or mentorship here and there. So, being able to be sort of real with yourself about what you get out of that summer experience, for example, is really important. There was one question in the chat about, you've only had summer experiences. That can be okay. You have to sort of look at the experiences that you had and really determine if it's really been meaningful to give you enough experience, enough research. It's not a cookie cutter thing to say, I had 3 summers and, maybe a year on campus and that's exactly enough. No, because each experience is going to be different and how you benefit and how you gain, from those experiences is important.
Thank you. There's one question that just got added in here. I think a big part of the questions that we've been seeing is the competitiveness and what exactly does that mean? Because you guys have mentioned, this is what makes a competitive applicant. And I see a lot of questions talking about how can you articulate that in your statements, like how your experience was, kind of like what you're describing, Dr. Lambert, about it doesn't necessarily matter if you had every single summer and during the year doing research, but what you got out of it. Sorry, Dr. Bowman.
Sure. Let me really quickly just kind of say a few things about admissions and what matters, and then I'll get to that. So the first thing I want to say, there is in these kinds of panels, there's always a lot of focus on personal statements and that sort of thing, and how you frame your application. I'll just comment that for us, your letters of support are way more important. Yeah, we want to hear you talk about your science. I really want to hear what your faculty thinks about the science you did, your faculty mentors. So that's kind of something that you can't change too much, but how do you make that stronger? And I see a question, how do you go the extra mile? The way to do that isn't so much after the experience is over, but during the experience. It's hard to show that you've gone the extra mile, hard to write about that yourself. What's more important and impactful is how your letter writers write about that. So what does that mean? Show up, ask questions, work hard. I think sometimes it's easy to see a summer experience as a temporary opportunity, but that's not all it is. This is a chance to dive into science, read papers, ask your mentor for more papers to read, or why they're doing their experiments, why you're doing the ones you're doing, how does it connect to the bigger picture, ask questions during lab meetings, be curious, be engaged. I think the people who sit back and wait to be told what to do might not actually be that interested. So don't sit back and wait. And that's hard as an undergrad. You're used to being told in undergrad what you're supposed to do in lab. This is your chance to break out and to push the envelope by asking what else you can do and asking what else you can read. And if you have a question about how your work connects to something else, ask that. That sort of mental engagement, that's what really matters. So I'll just quickly say letters of recommendation to us are probably the most, if not one of the most important parts of your application, followed by your academics and maybe your personal statement. I forgot what the big question was. What was your question, Gina? I just wanted to give that context. Oh, how do they know what is competitive? I think sometimes the amount of time you spend doing research, we're talking about how many summers and how many years do you do research. That matters to some extent in the sense of oftentimes a summer of research might not be enough to really dive in and understand what doing research is. So the numbers kind of matter in the sense of, you know, it's not like there's a cutoff to say you have to have 2 years of research and that's enough then. It's not like that. Yes, having done some amount of deep dive research matters. What matters more is how you talk about your experiences and what you got out of them. So unfortunately, it depends. Being competitive has more to do with how deep you're able to get into your project and how much you're able to intellectually contribute to what you're doing. So that intellectual contribution as well as the technical contribution. We want to see that you've gotten to the level where you are engaged in developing the questions, developing the approaches, you know, thinking about next steps. So having your letter writers talk about the intellectual side rather than just the Western blot you did that they asked you to do, there's a huge difference there. So sorry about that kind of big picture perspective, but I think that's some important context.
Thank you. Dr. Tanisei, would you like to add anything to that?
Right, I think what Liz is saying, you know, I say is take ownership of the project that you work on, you know, no matter how small, like, you know, you want to own it so that you can talk about it. And and it's clear that, you know, in your application and when you know, talk about it in the interview that, you know, you took charge, like you were driving the project or you're doing, you know, doing experiments, analyze data, talking about it, asking questions, you know, that's that's what independent scientists do. And that's what we're going to train for. But if we can already see that, you know, you have those abilities, you're learning and you're curious and you want to, you know, take to the next step. So like someone was saying before, you know, even if you're shy, just don't try to like, you know, sort of get out of your comfort zone. And if this is really what drives you, if research is what you want to do, you need to get out of your comfort zone and you know, ask, you know, bold questions and suggest ideas and that will, you know, lead to your, you know, mentors recognizing that, wow, the student really, you know, has the passion, the drive to want to be a scientist. And I think that will definitely, you know, leave a mark in you know, in the when, you know, screeners review the application.
Thank you. Dr. Lambert, did you want to add anything to that?
Now, just, you know, just I guess a quick summary about, you know, just thinking about the things that what make you competitive, you know, as was mentioned, your letters of recommendation and how people talk about you. And, you know, you want that glowing letter that says, oh, Marcus walks on water. Like he's, you know, he's just been really thoughtful to the lab, has brought new ideas, new experiments, and, you know, we're going to publish, you know, on this idea. You obviously want to be able to talk about and articulate your experiences and you know, your reasoning for wanting to choose that program in your personal statement. I think, you know, you want to have a good, you know, foundation of coursework that shows that you could handle the coursework in graduate school. I don't know if I'm missing anything else, but, you know, those things, they ultimately will help make you competitive.
Thank you. Okay, we have 5 more minutes. I was looking through the questions that people had submitted. And a lot of people talked about funding.
And Dr. Bowman, it looks like you have a...
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I see a couple of questions suggesting doing a master's maybe as a bridge to a PhD. And I think Marcus kind of briefly commented on this. I think that is not an essential part of applying to a PhD. And I just want to I think that's an important point to make clear here. Do not apply or pay for a master's program as a bridge to a PhD, unless, to me, the only reason a master's can be helpful if you know you want to get that PhD is if your undergraduate GPA is really not reflective of your potential. That's the only case where maybe doing exceptionally well in a master's will really help to show that there was just something that didn't match well with your undergrad. But otherwise, if you need research experience and that's the gap you're trying to fill, do that by working as a research assistant. Do that by doing a post-bac program. Do that by working at the NIH. There are many other ways you get paid to do that. So I just wanted to make that clear before we ended. So go ahead.
Thank you. I know we only have a few more minutes. Do any of you guys have any advice on funding? There's a lot of different biomedical PhD programs. You get funded different ways. I know when I was applying, I had no idea who was going to pay me. So a lot of students were asking if they should apply to external funding, apply to grants before they're accepted. Once you're accepted, contact an institution. So let's start with Dr. Lambert.
Yeah, I'll just say that funding should be one of the things that you pay attention to when choosing a school. Someone asked about, well, where do I start with choosing a PhD program? You want to think about funding, also think about geography and other things that are important to you. But so first thing I'm looking for if I was applying, which programs are going to guarantee my full support, as a PhD student, as long as I'm a PhD student, at least 7 years, but you don't intend to be there that long. But some programs don't have that full funding. So you want to, most top programs do. You want to look at that sort of guarantee of support. I think it's a good idea to also sort of come in with your own sort of fellowship money if you have that ability. That means applying when you are, before you enter a PhD program. And the main sort of funding route that I know of, or one of the only that I know of, is the Nsf Grfp, which is this graduate research fellowship program. And you can also apply when you're, in your first or second year of grad school. So it's no pressure. And especially for top programs, BioMed programs, most are going to provide that full funding. But it's always a nice feather in the cap if you sort of come in with an NSF, graduate research fellowship. There are also a lot of funding opportunities when you become a graduate student. So after you've already been accepted and begin to matriculate, you can apply for these NIH, F31s. You can apply for, be appointed to training grants. There are opportunities again to apply to NSF. And there are a number of other different types of fellowships like Ford and others that you can apply for when you're a graduate student. And I think the last point that I'll comment on is that just be aware that sometimes even though graduate school will say, hey, you're guaranteed funding, that funding comes from different sources depending on what year you are in graduate school. So sometimes some programs will say, hey, we'll sponsor this graduate student in their first year or their first 2 years centrally. So the central sort of graduate school office will support that student. But once you decide to join a laboratory, let's say in your second year, or maybe by the third year, then oftentimes your mentor or your PI will sort of take over the funding, source, essentially will begin funding you, maybe from their grants. But there are opportunities for training grants, opportunities for you to apply to fellowships, IMSD programs, GRISE, all of these other opportunities. So just pay attention to that in terms of funding sources. And then, that's always a nice feather in the cap. If you are going to be appointed to a training grant or IMSD program or a GRISE or something like that, and you're looking for a laboratory, it's nice to be able to say, hey, I know that part of my stipend will be supported by this mechanism. So it's just good to be aware of the funding source. But usually when applying to programs, the only thing you might want to pay attention to is the actual salary level.
Thank you. We're like right out of time. I don't know if either of you have any last words of advice before we finish.
I think funding, like with our institution, we guarantee funding. So we want to make sure that, faculty who accept students, they have funding. And if we're uncertain, we don't encourage students to go to that lab. So, so yeah, it's clearly something you want to keep, you want to make sure you understand when you're applying to different schools. And we don't want students to be worried about funding. But, we have resources to guarantee that.
Thank you.
I'll just
Did you want to add anything?
the only thing I'll say is I I hope it's okay for me to say this. I have a blog with a lot of tips and tricks for applying to grad programs. It's called Materials and Methods. So just if you Google materials, do you get it? Materials and Methods, do you get it? If you Google Materials and Methods blog, you might find some good stuff there.
Thank you, everyone, all of the panelists here, all of your advice and wisdom. We really appreciate it. So we'll look forward to jumping into the next session. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Good
Thank
luck.
you.